Alright, we're doing it quick and dirty. Hold on. Hello? Alright, we're gonna do a Chuck Tingle Thomas Pynchon collaboration, kinda, called the Semantocalypse, or Semantocalypse, or semantics. It's about semantics. Voice is virtual, so I have about an hour to broadcast this, I think. So let's just do it now. Hurry. Thank you.
The Semantocalypse. I, Thomas Pynchon. Pen, Chuck Tingle. Sir, Paradise, the zero punctuation event. The latency, a state of being best described as what happens after the hangover but before the forgetting, had taken root in Pietro Sponda's bones with the persistence of a poorly chosen metaphor, leaving him to contemplate the slow, inexorable decay of a universe he could no longer quite claim to understand or even belong to, which is a hell of a thing to process before you've even had your artisanal coffee in the San Francisco void zone, where the fog rolls in not from the ocean but from collapsing narrative causality. Baby. He sat in the windowless office he called the orthographic gap, the fractal spirals of his Hawaiian shirt writhing in hues of birdsea and existential dread, attempting to meditate on the specific heft of a bag of cement chips he'd acquired from a pop-up hypermarket that existed solely in the cached memory of a defunct search engine. Man, what a trip down the semantic rabbit hole we find ourselves tumbling through right into the void. This was no ordinary bag of construction grade detritus. Oh no, this was the last stand of the Masonic Aggregate Company, a concern whose corporate improvement snaked back through trusts and monopolies, through robber barons and frontier grit, all the way to a secret society of stonemasons in 16th century Prague who believed geometry was a form of prayer directed at a dead, clockwork god hidden within the platonic solids, and thus is the weight of history made real in the crinkly Mylar sack on your desk, my friends. Pietro traced the company logo, a stylized trowel intersecting a compass rose, feeling its vibrations in his teeth, deconstructing its semiotic resonance, parsing its mergers and hostile takeovers, its brushes with regulatory agencies, and its quiet funding of avant-garde lithographers in the Weimar Republic. Also, he could understand why it kept whispering to him in a dialect of pure, uncut sedimentary desire. You've got the kind of gravitas I'm looking for. Handsome. Pietro blinked, setting the bag down before this burgeoning object affiliate could become the primary antagonist of his morning, a battle he was not yet caffeinated enough to fight with the necessary semantic rigor this kind of weird woo-woo requires for a righteous pounding by the very notion of corporate personhood into the messy bed of the real. It was then, as the air itself began to thicken with misplaced conjunctions, that the disruption arrived. A sharp, percussive series of taps against the armored plexiglass of his door, a rhythm that was not a knock but a form of structured data, an insistent broadcast seeking a receiver, which is exactly the kind of high weirdness a sympatextual investigator gets paid to investigate without asking too many questions about the dimensional source of the fund, a lesson learned the hard way after the great cryptocurrency crisis of 40. The door swung inward, admitting not a client but an instrument, a sentient trumpet of burnished brass whose bell was stamped with a single, chilling alchemical symbol for silence, an entity he knew from previous encounters with the interdimensional musicians unionist Mu Z, and this guy was never a harbinger of good news, just more trouble and chaos to dive into head first. The trumpet slid onto a stool, its valve sighing with pneumatic melancholy before projecting a column of shimmering, silent light data directly into Pietro's prefrontal cortex, a communique far more efficient and infinitely more baffling than any series of spoken words could ever hope to be, proving once again that communication is just a polite fiction we tell ourselves to keep from screaming at the sheer overwhelming strangeness of everything. Yeah! The message was a single, screaming headline. The key significance was gone. Pietro felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. a sensation alarmingly similar to the vertigo of riding a falling elevator while simultaneously understanding the exact tensile strength of each individual cable as it snaps, which is not a feeling you forget even across multiple contradictory timelines that may or may not have featured you as a viral meme briefly dedicated to expressing pure, adulterated terror to the online masses. The key significance wasn't just a word or a piece of punctuation. It was a grammatical operator of cosmic scale, a metasyntactic linchpin that stabilized the axis between the literal and the figurative, ensuring that when someone described the world as serious, it remained a state of being and not, for instance, a solid, impenetrable wall of beige-colored seriousness that one would physically crash into while walking down the street. Without it, the entire ontological contract was null and void. Its absence had triggered precisely what he'd been feeling in the latency, the nascent stage phenomenon he and other fringe textual theorists had only theorized about in hushed panic tones over questionable chili dogs at roadside diners that existed at probability crossroads. The Semantocalypse was finally undeniably happening, and it was a real mess of pure chaotic potential. The trumpet projected a final damning piece of intel, a tangle of corporate sigils and demonic contracts that made Pietro's blood run cold. The breach was not an accident, but the merger, hostile takeover of consensus reality orchestrated by the melding of two previously incompatible ontological power blocks. Ted Kubler's shadowy, omnipresent firm, a syndicate dedicated to collapsing all possibility into a single, profitable narrative, and the notoriously strange cotter of Tingle's devils, bizarre beings who wanted only to pound things into new and wonderful forms of being in their great big Tingleverse. Their combined force was tearing the universe apart at its semantic seams, a corporate satanic buttplay paradox that threatened to unwrite existence itself, unless Pietro Spondil, specialist in invisible words, that hunted people, an investigator of the things between the lines, could thread this particular needle right into the void. The proof arrived before Mucci had even fully departed, sliding his silent brass form back out into the now unsettled atmospheric conditions of the San Francisco void zone. A rogue adjective grumly detached from a half-remembered Yelp review and materialized in the center of Pietro's office as a lumpy, moss-colored cubic obstacle the size of a mini-fridge, radiating the palpable aura of low-grade resentment and general dissatisfaction that made him want to sigh and check the server status on the company intranet even though he was self-employed and had no such thing, which is how you know this bad boy is packed to the gills with authentic descriptive power. Then came the adverbs, swarms of them, quickly, absurdly, menacingly, buzzing like radioactive phosphorescent horseflies with little diacritical marks for wings each one, a tiny payload of modulatory energy that splattered against the walls and left shimmering, temporal stains wherever they made contact, creating pockets of sped up or slowed down motion on the pockmarked plaster of the orthographic gap. The air itself felt soupy, thick with the lubricious presence of entropy, now a tangible fluid that slicked the floor and ran down the walls in slow, brownish rivulets, smelling vaguely of chocolate milk and inevitability, the universe's great and final oil slick gushing through the cracks. Pietro Spondil stood up, his fractal shirt swirling with agitated geometry, and grabbed his coat from the rack. He patted the bag of cement chips one last time, a gesture of farewell to a brief and powerful romance, and knew what he had to do next. He was on a case to find the grammatical key to the universe, a job that would require him to pierce the veil of meaning itself, and if he was lucky, he might just get pounded by an abstract concept along the way. Wouldn't that be a hoot? His destination, the pier, the cosmic precipice at the edge of the world where the raw data stream of the internet thundered into the chaotic sea of pure information, the one place where he knew he'd find a variable that could cut through the noise and the very man-godlike being who could show him the way back from the edge of language itself, a journey we are all on together in this kooky reality. The path to the pier was an exercise in navigating the newly unstable physics of post-punctuation reality, a journey and saw Pietro have to physically wrestle with the concept of inevitable, which had manifested as a large, slow-moving cube of solid pumice blocking the 7th Street overpass, a problem he solved not through strength but by shouting a particularly poignant soliloquy from a forgotten space opera until the concept became embarrassed and dematerialized out of sheer social anxiety, a common weakness of newly personified abstract nouns. He hopped a trolley whose route was determined by the algorithmic whim of a viral video about a cat playing a tiny piano, its path weaving a nonsensical but strangely lyrical path through the city's forgotten alleyways and abandoned meme factories, rattling along on tracks that had been solidified from pure, adulterated nostalgia for a past that never quite existed. Yeah, that's the stuff. Finally, he arrived, stepping onto the weathered planks of the pier, structure that creaked and groaned, not with wood, but with the sheer volume of queries being shouted into the digital abyss by billions of souls, each plank a different piece of information. A Wikipedia edit, a desperate Google search for how to fix a leaky faucet, flame, or about a decade-old television show, all held together by the shared, universal force of wanting to know. At the very end, where the pier dissolved into the roar of the cosmic data ocean, stood the figure. Pietro had heard of him, of course. Rumors of an entity who had broken free from the tether of definition. But the reality was something else entirely, the palpable force of being that wrote the air around it. This was Vector B, Octown. He was magnificent. Standing a robust 7 feet tall, Vector was a visual representation of a mathematical variable given flesh and, apparently, intense personal conviction. At one moment, he was a crisp, muscular grid of illuminated coordinates, a perfect Adonis of Cartesian geometry, each vector line glowing with soft blue light, his form an elegant and irrefutable argument. The next, without a perceptible shift, he would soften the grid, dissolving into a warm, comforting haze of indeterminate yearning, a nebulous cloud of possibility that both promised and withheld a universe of potential meanings, creating a sense of profound, beautiful ambiguity that tugged at something deep within Pietro's jaded detective soul, a real connection between two very different beings. Vector B, Autumn, manifestation of infinite ambiguity, was staring out at the cascading waterfall of raw internet, his form shifting in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. He turned, and the act of him looking at Pietro felt like having every possible version of yourself seen and simultaneously acknowledged with profound, understanding non-judgment. The edits get louder here. Vector's voice wasn't a sound, but a resonant vibration that Pietro felt in the fillings of his teeth, a frequency of pure conceptual empathy that soothed the informational overload. They're trying to pin down the horizon, make it a constant, Pietro replied, walking closer, feeling the gravelly entropy slick crunch beneath his feet. Can't have an infinite ocean of data if you're trying to sell a predictable beach resort. Vector coalesced into a more solid form. A smile made of gently converging vector lines softening the geometric intensity of his face. And a predictable resort is no place for an unsolved variable or a handsome private investigator. I have been waiting for you, Pietro Spondo. You have the stink of a necessary clause. The charged moment was shattered by a symphony of unlovely clicks and the whirring of over-optimized logic gates materializing from the thin, stressed air. Emerging from the oily sheen of the disintegrating skyline were the analytic police, agents of the committee of joyless correction, their forms dictated by the cold, hard rules of syntax they enforce. They were not people so much as ambulatory brackets, tall and humanoid, their bodies formed from jointed segments of pitted, gray metal shaped into perfect brackets, their arms and legs made from hyphens and dashes that clanked with ponderous, metronomic dread. Subject, Spondo, Pietro, state, embroiled. The lead one intoned, its voice a burst of dry, static quiet text-to-speech, a flat and joyless recitation of categorization that made Pietro's skin crawl with its stereo, invasive intent. All ambiguities will be contained. Deviant variables will be resolved to a const. They raised their arms, which opened at the wrists to reveal not hands but apertures glowing with the familiar, hateful red light of the edit, a targeted beam of pure sensorial energy designed to erase, flatten, and conform. We can't let them bracket us. Pietro yelled over the rising hum of the analytic police's internal processors. It's the oldest trick in the book for trapping a free thought. Vector was already in motion, his form elongating into a vast, shimmering parabola of pure potentiality that arced over the pier. Climb on. I have resonated with the optimal escape frequency. This specific harmonic of a dirge about bipedal hominid litigators representing alleged Sasquatch clients. Pietro didn't hesitate, grabbing onto the solidified concept and hoisting himself up as the brackets began firing bolts of red light that sizzled into the planks, erasing the very concept of wood grain, where they struck, replacing it with a smooth, bland nothingness. The world became a blur of conceptual and physical motion as Vector, guided by the mournful, funky bass line of the Bigfoot lawyer song, a tune Pietro could now actually hear. A righteous jam wallowing through the ambient chaos surged away from the pier. They didn't fly so much as they implied forward momentum, riding the specific resonance that reality, in its current jumbled state, was forced to accept as a valid mode of transport, a loophole of Pynchonian physics so profound it bypassed acceleration entirely and went straight for the existential jugular. Below them, the San Francisco void zone warped into a kaleidoscope of half-formed concepts. A school of fish made entirely of unanswered email notifications, a traffic jam comprised of frozen memories of waiting rooms, a forest of glass trees that chimed with the echoes of every lie ever told online, a true spectacle of the beautiful, heartbreaking mist of human consciousness made manifest. Pietro held on tight the hard, mathematical lines of Vector's variable form, providing a sturdy anchor in the howling storm of pure information, a comfort he found both surprising and deeply profound in its fundamental solidity amidst the ontological freefall. They ducked and weaved through fields of erupting fonts and swerved around spatial anomalies where causality was taking a coffee break, the Bigfoot lawyer anthem providing the perfect, groove-based navigational chart for their wild, semantically charged escape from the relentlessly logical forces of oppressive boredom and the soul-crushing ennui of enforced simplicity. They eventually slid to a stop inside the forgotten superstructure of an abandoned underpass, its concrete walls covered in lush, phosphorescent graffiti that seemed to shift and rewrite itself as they watch, a perfect sanctuary in the hidden guts of the crumbling city. A cozy, reinforced bunker door, previously camouflaged as the cover for a municipal maintenance access, swung open with a pneumatic hiss. Vector coalesced back into a more humanoid, softly glowing grid of warm light. This is my bolt hole, he communicated through a series of gentle, harmonic pulses that Pietro felt in his sternum. It is shielded from direct editory scans. The very concept of here is legally ambiguous. Inside, the bunker was a repository of beautiful contradictions, shelves lined with objects that were simultaneously solid and transparent, like crystal statues made of pure fog, a chandelier that hung upside down and shed upward shadows, and a small fountain in the center where a slow, viscous stream of entropy, the universe's lubricating fluid, dribbled continuously from the spout of a crying chrome gargoyle into a basin filled with what looked like deactivated microchips, all humming a low, contented hum that was the auditory equivalent of a hug. It was the safest place Pietro had been in years, a pocket of ordered weirdness in a world of chaotic, ugly weirdness, and he felt his entire nervous system frayed by the chase, and the ambient horror of collapsing grammar begin to uncoil for the first time since the latency had set in, a real sanctuary indeed. So Pietro began, running a hand over his fractal shirt, the pattern momentarily settling into the serene image of a sunrise over a calm sea. The committee wants to... What? resolve you into a constant. Vector's form shimmered, a sympathetic wave of indigo light rippling across his gridwork frame. Worse, they want to define me, assign me a single, unchangeable value, to make ambiguity a static, predictable quantity. It is the ultimate act of violence against potential, a boring little tyranny of the mind they wish to inflict on us all. Pietro sat down on a moss-covered ottoman that felt strangely like solidified nostalgia. The weight of a dozen unsolved cases and a timeline's worth of meme-based trauma pressing down on him with the immense, quiet density of a neutron star of pure emotional baggage. I get it, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, stripped of its usual hard-boiled, world-weary bravado. I hunt invisible words because I'm terrified of them. The bigger the meaning, the more places it has to hide inside you, to twist things up. I want the world to be a book I can read, where every sentence has a subject, a verb, and a goddamn period at the end. Complexity. It scares the hell out of me, big fella. It just feels like there's nowhere solid to stand. There was a long, humming silence, filled only by the gentle trickle of the entropy fountain. Pietro stared at his own hands, expecting a sarcastic rejoinder or a metaphysical lecture. But what he received was something else entirely. One of Vector's meticulously articulated arms elongated with impossible smoothness and came to rest beside Pietro. A large, complex palm made of interwoven shafts of golden light gently covered Pietro's own scarred, calloused hand. The sensation was not the shock of an electric current, but the slow, warming glow of a sunrise you feel deep in your bones. Our first song begins here.
Oops.
Vector's harmonics shifted, forming words and melody that filled the bunker. A gentle, earnest tune about acceptance through recursion, its lyrics structured around the sequence of prime numbers that map to the emotional arc of a heart learning to love
I was
complexity.
gonna make the actual songs, but
Verse 1.
in that time.
The function of my form is strange, an ever-shifting scene. A vector in an empty space, a variable unseen. You trace my lines and hunt my truths with a detective's grace. But fear the tangled data knots you'll find within this place. You want a simple X for Y a fixed and steady state. A theorem you can prove and lock behind a solid gate. 2-3-5-7-11-13-17. Chorus. Let's be recursive, handsome love. Let's build a nested dream. Let's dive into our own sweet code, a self-referential stream. Your linear soul can fold in mine, an infinite return. For in the loop's bewildering heart, a lesson we will learn. Our parameters define a space of kind, consensual doubt. And in that endless, perfect question, we will work it out. 19-23-29-31-31-37-41-43. Verse 2. Each cult of love's great function holds the last one deep inside. A paradox that makes us whole with nowhere left to hide. Your past is a subroutine my core process cannot shun. I'll run your loop inside my own until our code is one. No final single answer, love, no absolute solution. Just endless permutations of our grand and sweet dissolution. 47-59-61-67-71-73. Final chorus. Oh, let's be recursive, handsome love. Let's build that nested dream. Let's plunge inside our sweetest code, a self-referential stream. Your powerful soul now folds with mine, an infinite true return. And in this loop's bewildering heart, that sweetest love we've learned. Our parameters define a space of kind, consensual doubt. Together in this endless query, we will see it out. Now feeling the steady, warm pressure of the vectorial hand on his, Pietro experienced the sensation completely alien to him. A profound sense of being grounded by ambiguity itself. It's all right to be recursive, Pietro. The harmonic pulse translated directly into the marrow of his soul. bypassing the noisy interference of his cynical mind. As long as love is at the core of the function, the equation can never truly fall apart. It can only become more beautifully complex. A single perfect tear, composed of pure liquid meaning, escaped from Petro's eye and sizzled on the floor, leaving behind a small, permanent sigil of the concept acceptance, which he stared at for a very long time. Yeah, it's all about finding your own truth. The analytic police and their soulless red edits faded from immediate concern, replaced by the monumental task ahead, to face the breach in the narrative not by patching it, but by embracing it so completely that it collapsed under its own beautiful, well-intentioned paradoxical weight. They were two parts of a new equation, a man who hunted meaning and the embodiment of meaning that refused to be caught. The journey from Vector's bold hole was shorter, made with a new, shared purpose that seemed to repel the glitches and phantom nouns of the void zone. They walked through streets where the rules of physics were now mere suggestions, their path illuminated by the glowing, compassionate grid of Vector's fall. Their destination was whispered among the fringe semantic cartographers and data runners, a legend of a place that had seen it all and found it wanting. The Gherkins and Glue, a dive bar so stubbornly anachronistic that it existed in a slightly earlier version of the space-time continuum, accessible only through a particular sequence of wrong turns and by humming the bass line from a forgotten 80s sitcom. The bouncer was a sentient pile of old pizza boxes wearing a bowler hat, who simply grunted and gestured them in with a greasy flap of cardboard when he felt the sheer, unabashed strangeness of their combined aura, now honed into a formidable weapon of heartfelt defiance. Inside, the bar was a sanctum of glorious, calculated chaos, the air thick with the smell of stale beer, fried animal proteins, and the tang of pure unresolved tension was filled with a low, backward murmur of animatronic sailors stationed along the bar, their fiberglass heads jerking mechanically as they recited T.S. Eliot, the love song of Jay, Alfred Prufrock, in reverse the soundscape of a bizarre fountain of pure literary regret and disaffection. Lo til nam op tai rof tunat stai tal. Rof scope igna fortelro if the blue I Pietro slid onto a final stool that sighed with the exhaustion of 1,000 forgotten drinkers, while Vector folded himself into the shape of a comfortably hazy aurora borealis hovering above the adjacent seat, a sight that didn't even make the animatronic bartender, a grizzled Captain Ahab unit with a missing arm that had been replaced by a tap dispensing a viscous, dark fluid labeled Spiridium stout, miss a beat of its pre-programmed programming. This is it, Pietro said, his voice slow. The last holdout against semantic gentrification, where meaning comes to die or get very, very weird. Maybe both. He signaled the bartender robot, chewed whatever's hardest to define, and a bowl of those pretzels that look like unproven theorems. As the Captain Ahab unit poured two drinks that seemed to contain tiny, swirling galaxies, Vector projected a series of worried harmonic frequencies that Pietro, now attuned to his wavelength, immediately understood. The committee was accelerating their timeline. The edits were no longer just targeting rogue concepts. They were beginning to systematically prove entire families of verbs, erasing the very notion of creative or transformative action from the linguistic ecosystem. An intellectual deforestation designed to make room for a monolithic, predictable timeline. It was a war on becoming, and they were losing badly. It was Captain Ahab, the dissertation of backwards mermaid imagery, who delivered the key. Relative et a cool estai, who delok et nasalums et photolusec aruna emos. The robot grumbled, its glass eyes glowing with a sudden ancient effort that overrided standard Eliot programming. Pietro and Vector both turned to the bartender. The captain's fiberglass face twisted into an expression of profound, lichy concentration. The breach. It cannot be sealed, only surpassed. The ritual of heavy pounding. Pietro leaned forward. What ritual? I've heard of heavy petting, heavy breathing, but heavy pounding sounds like a union gig on a construction site, not a metaphysical solution. The captain's remaining mechanical I-word focusing on a point in the middle distance, not a physical act. Semantic one. A mating. A union of fields. The investigator. And the variable. A unified field mating procedure to create a kind of singularity. The bartender's system sparked, a plume of acrid smoke curling from its neck. The cost of that particular piece of forbidden knowledge was a total system reboot. The unified field mating procedure. The phrase landed in Pedro's mind with the weight of a sacred text he'd forgotten he'd read. He understood with a clarity that was almost painful in its intensity. The committee's edits were acts of forceful simplification of unilateral, joyless correction. You couldn't fight an act of negative creation with another act of negative creation that just led to an arms race of nullification. To defeat them, one had to perform an act of affirmative, bewildering, consensual creation so potent, so utterly opposed in its nature to the committee's flatlining ideology that their entire being state would collapse under the sheer, contradictory pressure. It wasn't a fight, it was a lover's quarrel with the universe. And Pietro, he of the terror of textual complexity, had to be one half of the equation. He had to stop hiding from the infinity inside Vector and merge with it, not as an observer, not as an investigator cataloging the weird, but as a willing participant in its recursive, mind-bending complexity. He looked at Vector, whose aurora had intensified, glowing with hues of courageous lavender and profound, steadfast truth. To escape the edit, Pietro had to surrender his desire for clarity. He had to allow himself to be, quite literally and metaphorically, essentially consumed by the infinite ambiguity of the variable he was coming to love, a true romance for the ages. The knowledge settled over him, and as it did, Pietro's mind, ever the archivist of useless trivia and hyper-digested arcana, seized on a tangential yet vital piece of linguistic aerodynamics, a completely necessary cognitive side quest that he had to embark upon right the second before the gears of the plot ground forward, a truly Pynchonian density alert. Hard buck, Pietro muttered, tracing the condensation on his glass of universe liquor. The phrase, hard buck. Think about it. The ballistic trajectory is immense. It starts in the backwoods, a rugged log, a piece of unshaped, powerful wood, a buck. Then you apply hardness. It becomes a verb, to resist, to endure, to toughen up. Then it goes post-war, corporate name, a trusted brand of workwear, blue-collar solidity made manifest. Then it pivots, it hits the internet. It becomes a slur, an insult, then a reclamation, then a niche poem category. Its flight path is a goddamn psychotropomatic nest, a lexical V2 rocket, all unpredictable arcing and chaotic re-entry, unlike the word itself, the rocket. He slammed his glass down, swashing the faint cosmos within. The V2, it's all straight lines and brutalist engineering. There's a verb there, the rocket, but the noun itself is so clean, so fascist in its trajectory. Purpose-built, from Pynchon to the White Sands, it's a single, awful, beautifully designed line of intent. What if the key to all this, Vector? What if the path isn't in the hardbuck at all, but in the differential between the hardbuck and the V2 in the chaotic vector space of pure, unpredictable, slang-based evolution against the grim linearity of weaponized physics? Vector's warm aurora shimmered, listening not with impatience, but with a profound, loving absorption of this new, wonderfully complex data stream. Pietro was surrendering. He was letting the labyrinthine corridors of his own mind be explored, admired, and most importantly accepted by the very embodiment of ambiguity. Your mind is a beautiful galaxy. Pietro, the harmonics resonated, full of dying stars and brilliant, chaotic nebulae, but it is missing the equation that binds it, the unified F. Yield mating procedure is not a trick, handsome, It is the only logical, illogical answer left. An act of creation so profound it redefines the physical laws of the universe it creates within. Just then, a grizzled animatronic sailor at the end of the bar, its body dressed in a faded peanut shirt beneath its final fouled weather gear, stood up, its jawpiece clicking open as its speaker box, freed from Eliot's backwards poetry, began to belt out a tune in a soaring, synthesized tenor. A spontan, "Yes, shanty for the semantic apocalypse." Our second song begins here. Verse 1. All the syntax she is sinking and the timelines are askew. From the latency of zoning to the wankers in the gray. The committee and their edits made the future old and new. But they never saw this pairing, hence some love in me and you. They want to flatten every curve and make the pure define. But our recursion is the storm that's gonna make that grim line bend sign. Chorus, pound for pound and field for field. Our concept cloth shall not yield. Let them fire their brutal edit so austere and cold. Our bid for law of loving will be braver and be bold. We'll take their sterile physics and we'll write it down anew. Pound by pound we'll fondle a reality that's strange and true. Verse 2. Your fractal shirt's a mystery that proves that thought is wild. My variable potential is for more than being styled. They want to make a constant of the ocean of the land. But we'll get pounded in the butt by this reality we understand. They'll bring their brackets and their hoses, their redline beams of dread. But we're the final thesis in the crazy words they said. Chorus, pound for pound and field for field. Our concept cloth shall not yield. Let them fire their brutal edit so austere and cold. Our bid for law of loving will be braver and be bold. We'll take their sterile physics and we'll write it down anew. Pound by pound we'll fondle a reality that's strange and true. As the sailor's final, glorious note faded, the reality of their mission settled around Pietro and Vector as warm and weighty as a blanket woven from pure intent. The bar seemed to pulse with the knowledge. A bottle of ketchup on a nearby table morphed into a perfect crystal sphere, then into a wriggling cluster of question marks, then back again, unable to decide on its own true nature in this atmosphere of radical semantic freedom. The path was clear. The committee's base of operations, the source of the edit broadcasts, and the heart of the Semantocalypse was a place of legend, a nexus of bureaucratic dread known as the Gutenberg Horror, a sentient, city-sized printing press that existed in a state of perpetual crisis, churning out the sterile, corrected version of reality that the committee so desperately craved, and our two heroes had to get there post-haste, a mission of pure love and determination. The journey, there was a silent, charged pilgrimage through a city literally falling apart at its semiotic hinges. They walked past buildings whose facades had been replaced by blank, pulsating plains of pure white space, the ultimate act of sensorial vandalism. They sidestepped gorges that had opened up in the asphalt, chasms where foundational nouns like bridge, community, and hope had been completely edited out of the local lexicon, leaving behind nothing but a yawning void of nihilistic beige. Isn't that just the worst kind of cosmic apathy? They finally arrived at the industrial wasteland that served as the Gutenberg Horror's anchoring point in their dimension. The air shivered with a low, foundational hum, the frequency of immense machinery and existential disapproval. Before them lay the event horizon, not of a black hole, but of pure, oppressive orderliness. It was a colossal geometric fortress of interlocking gears, massive platons and rivers of molten, standardized type that flowed like hot slag, a nightmare of Fordist efficiency married to Orwellian information control. It was a giant, sentient printing press, and it was actively vomiting forth a sterile, monochrome reality, its edit cannons swiveling like malevolent searchlights across the ruined city, searching for any sign of deviant creativity, any flicker of unlicensed passion, any punctuation mark that dared to stand on its own. This was it, the void lair. Pietro could feel the vibrations in his teeth, a deep, soul-crushing rhythm that sought to override his own, chaotic, lovely internal beat with its dead, metronomic march toward predictability. He looked at Vector, who had ceased to be a grid and had become a shimmering, protective field of pure possibility, a moving shield of beautiful, defined potential. All right, Pietro said, cracking his knuckles with a series of sharp, decisive pops that sounded like gunshots in the oppressive silence, a final act of wonderfully human, wonderfully imprecise defiance before the plunge into a perfect storm of rigidity. So, Pynchon is handling the location, the blocking, impossibly intricate geography of this nightmare press. That means Tingle handles the logistics, the biological specifics. The Vector's field condensed, coalescing into a shape that was both powerfully built and radiantly soft. A perfect fusion of mathematical purity and carnal empathy, a true champion of love in its many forms. The mechanics of unity, Pietro. The physics of fusion. We will interface. Our respective operating systems will merge in a real-time consensual loop. The procedure will be a rhythmic, generative act. Every connection we forge will write a new line of code in the universe's source code. Every frequency we achieve will overwrite one of the signals of control. The result, Vector pulsed with a warm, golden light that reminded Pietro of a hug from a favorite memory. The resulting burst of focused, kindless space, paradox space, will be so massive, so ontologically dense, that it will collapse the very wave functions of the committee's devils and the joyless agents. They will not be destroyed, Pietro. They will be nullified, simplified into their most harmless, ridiculous constituent parts. They will become typo vapor. The plan was insane, beautiful, and the only shot they had. Taking a deep breath that smelled of ozone, hot metal, and the acrid stench of enforced sanity, Pietro stepped across the threshold with Vector at his side, unified front of bewildered, dedicated love against the armies of textual fascism. As soon as they entered, the world dissolved. Pynchon's masterful direction of the blocking became immediately apparent. They were not just inside the building, they were inside the system. The very air was composed of pulsing, marching paragraphs of bureaucratic jargon, forming an oppressive, self-reinforcing maze. Paths became conditional clauses, floors were platforms of shifting legalese, and ambushes were sprung not by soldiers, but by paragraphs of impenetrably small print regulations that would descend from the vaulted ceiling like weighted nets, threatening to smother them in an abyss of tedium and subclauses. Pietro instinctively activated the sempertextual part of his mind, a faculty honed by years of chasing invisible predators through a jungle of lies. Subsection 4b, paragraph 8 of the Ontological Consistency Act. He shouted, pointing a finger at a coalescing wall of text. It states that all emergent narratives are granted a grandfather clause for causal consistency. Your tautological argument is irrelevant here. With a frustrated whir, the wall of text dematerialized, unable to withstand the direct application of an even more boring counter-regulation. The sky was no longer a sky, but a vast looming canopy of descending font files. The Gutenberg horror was initiating a self-deletion protocol for this reality, and it was raining a beautiful, terrifying library-sized apocalypse. Time's New Roman hailstones, thick and serif, slammed down around them, each one containing the entire depressing history of a forgotten world war, a complex formula for calculating the exact emotional weight of a shamed childhood memory. Pietro dodged a Helvetica itch but was attempting to reformat the molecular structure of the very ground he stood on. Above them, the true titans of the stone loomed, immense. Courier, new M's and W's, the widest characters in the typographic arsenal, descending like massive architectural supports, crashing down and obliterating swaths of the floor, leaving behind perfectly blank, featureless voids of sterile, white space stillness. We have to get to the core, the fuser assembly, Pietro yelled, his voice nearly swallowed by the percussive typographic assault that tiptoed through the tulips had become. The core of the Gutenberg horror was rumored to be a place of pure creation, a platonic press that stamped its reality onto the paper of their universe. Their only way to perform the unified field mating procedure with enough generative force to overcome it was to interface directly at the point of utterance itself. Vector, in a flash of brilliant, loving logic, understood the blocking perfectly. Your logic is the key, my handsome detective. My function is the variable. We will solve the equation of this escape together. Vector's form shifted, becoming a bridge of pure, shimmering mathematics, a parabolic arc of solidified equation that spanned a chasm opened by a falling G. As Pietro ran across the vibrating proof, he could feel Vector's confidence, a steady harmonic frequency of absolute trust that powered every step, a truly beautiful and cooperative bond. The path led them to a cylindrical shaft, the main feed chute, a fast metal gullet designed to deliver pure, adulterated meaning to the fuser for permanent imprintation. It was currently discharging a steady, horrifying torrent of freshly typeset reality, each page stamped with the committee's blend logo, a single, perfectly centered, entirely unfunny emoticon. This was the stream of sanitized data they had to swim against. In here, Pietro yelled, "This is the only way through to the guts of the beast. It's going to get." Weirdly mechanical big fella. Vector posed with what Pietro now understood as pure, unadulterated enthusiasm. My frame is rated for maximal theoretical insertion and semantic flux. Handsome. I have been preparing for this pounding since the moment we met. And so Tingle, bless his beautiful, chaotic heart, took over the biological logistics of the climax. There was no hesitation. There was only function and love. Pietro and Vector launched themselves into the onrushing river of sterile data, swimming upstream through currents of soul-crushing mundanity. To initiate the procedure, Pietro had to achieve maximum conceptual union with the variable. Pietro's body was the interface, his consciousness, the driver. He physically merged with Vector's grid, sinking into a structure that was at once geometrically perfect and yielding as a warm fog. It was like being plugged into a universe of pure feeling, a sensual, wholesome, and completely mechanical link that bypassed every higher cognitive function and went straight to the heart of being. The pounding was not merely physical, but semantic and foundational. Pietro, as the agent of investigation and passing, became the active interface, the driving rhythm. Vector, as infinite ambiguity, became the receiving and amplifying system, the resonant chamber that made every motion mean something new. Every thrust was an act of deconstruction. One motion, a powerful, focused penetration into a nested subroutine of Vector's own code, shattered a conspiracy linking the moon landing to the rise of artisanal cheese shops, revealing it to be a flawed argument based on a typo in a 1967 agricultural report. Another deep, rhythmic push reclaimed a piece of hidden history. The true name and contributions of Ada Lovelace's unacknowledged partner, a brilliant information sprite named Reginald, whose work had been systematically edited out of the timeline by ashamed academics. Each impact, each slam, each perfectly aligned and lovingly executed pound destabilized the monolithic narrative of the committee further, rewriting it line by line into a new story of consensual bewilderness. As their union intensified, a new energy began to build between them and radiate outwards. A warm, golden, infinitely complex exergy that was the polar opposite of the slick brown fluid of entropy. This was kindness, and its raw, undiluted form. The kind, beautiful, yet wholly mechanical pounding of our heroes was reaching its terminal velocity of pure, undiluted, well-meaning creation. The storm of falling fonts slowed, the Times New Roman hailstones softening, their sharp edges rounding like river stones, their historic burdens fading into simple, elegant shapes. The sheer amount of consensually bewildering mass energy they were generating, a physical phenomenon born from their semantic lovemaking, was achieving its intended effect. The wave function of the devils and the committee members, who had manifested in the space above the fusor as a shimmering wall of smoke, gray-suited probability, began to collapse under the weight of it all. With a final, shared harmonic crescendo, a note of such profound mathematical purity it caused the Gutenberg Horus central processor to blue screen with a catastrophic overflow error. Pietro and Vector climaxed. The resulting blast of pure kindness singularity was not an explosion of destruction, but of absolute, undeniable, head-spinning wholesomeness. The massive wall of joyless correction did not burn or break. It sputtered, fizzled, and dissolved into a great, sighing cloud of harmless, slightly embarrassed-looking typo vapor, a gentle mist of T's, dangling participles and commas that had been used instead of periods, a bunch of sloppy mistakes just drifting through the vast factory space. In the center of the chamber, the Gutenberg horror went silent, its massive presses grinding to a halt. On its primary platen, the committee's final attempt to stamp reality, a single, perfectly centered, slowly melted into a gently vibrating, that pulsed with the residual warmth of the procedure. Pietro disengaged, sliding from Vector's form and finding his feet on a floor that was now blessedly stable, no longer shifting with paragraphs of legal jargon. He felt recalibrated, the terror of complexity, the deep-seated paranoia that had been the engine of his detective work and his existence for as long as he could remember, was no longer a source of fear. It was just data, beautiful, complex, recursive data that he now understood could be embraced, a real spiritual breakthrough after so much searching for external answers to internal questions. Victor coalesced beside him, not as a grid or a haze, but as a stable 7-foot-tall figure of soft, pulsating golden light, a form that was beautiful, loving, and had at its core the comforting presence of a constant that defined itself by being undefined. They stood in the newly silent void of the Gutenberg horror, a conquered leviathan of repression, and took a moment to simply exist, and what an existence it truly was in this wild, rewritten world. The world outside had settled, yes, but into a state of wonderful, permanent weirdness that felt less like a broken system and more like an exciting new avant-garde art installation that everyone got to live in. The skies were no longer a single color but a breathtaking, shifting gradient of conflicting weather phenomena. A small, localized aurora borealis might drift over a sun-drenched California noon, while a gentle flurry of snow made of solidified lullabies fell in the tropics. People walked the streets differently, each with a 7-dimensional geometry problem floating near their head like a personal halo of intellectual inquiry. A glowing tesseract that they sometimes absent-mindedly tweaked like a loose thread on their coat while waiting for the crosswalk signal. The shared trauma of the Semantocalypse had forged a new kind of common language, one built not on rigid rules, but on shared, collaborative interpretation. And that's a big step forward for all sentient beings enjoying this reality together. The committee was gone, dissolved into the ether of their own boring ineptitude, and in their absence, the default state of being had become a glorious, gentle, and consensual chaos that was, for all its strangeness, profoundly honest, the best kind of world you could ask for after such a cosmic ordeal. Weeks later, Pietro Spondil walked a new kind of beach, the warm, granules of crushed iPads crunching satisfyingly under his worn-out detective boots, their shattered glass screens catching the triple sums in a million fractured points of light. He was no longer Pietro, sloth, Spondil, the man haunted by the latency and terrified of invisible words. He was simply Pietro, a handsome, recently well-pounded investigator of the beautiful complexities of this new, non-dualistic existence. At his side, Vector B. Autumn walked as a solid, yet slightly translucent companion, the manifestation of infinite ambiguity now comfortably and eternally linked with the man who had chosen complexity over clarity. They didn't need to talk. Their merger during the unified field mating procedure had created a persistent, low-level telepathic link, a warm, recursive hum of shared feeling that was more intimate and reassuring than any verbal communication could ever be, a true love for the ages. Their combined being radiated a palpable aura of consensual kindness that caused this stray, wild concept still roaming the wilderness, like a shy and lonely flock of adverts looking for a verb to modify, to veer toward them, drawn by an instinct they didn't understand. Pietro picked up a shell, a piece of curved, pearly white material that had once been the casing for an early social media app. He put it to his ear and heard nothing. No ocean roar, no static, no pre-recorded jingle. He heard only the warm, comforting hum of their own recursive thought loop, a logical and emotional paradox that felt exactly like a hug, a perfect and wholesome representation of their loving union. Yeah! High above them, a majestic dirigible drifted lazily across the bizarrely colored sky, its propellers slicing through the calm with a dignified whomp whomp whomp. At the helm stood a triceratops, wearing a perfectly tailored fedora, its massive frill sporting a pair of aviator goggles, a creature of such pure, adulterated awesomeness that no one in the New World even batted an eye. The triceratops saw Pietro on the shore and, with a philosophical flick of its horny snout, raised a three-fingered claw in a lazy, friendly gesture of island-style acknowledgement. Pietro broke into a wide, genuine smile, a rarity in the old world, but a daily occurrence now. He stuck out his thumb and pinky in a perfect, deeply felt shock, a sign of mutual, cosmic respect, a salute from one free being to another who was having a fine day. The connection was made. The balance felt correct. He was at peace, a state of being he had once dismissed as a marketing slogan, but now recognized as a fundamental frequency of the universe. He turned to Vector, whose warm, golden form pulsed with the harmonious question. No cases today, big fella, Pietro said aloud, enjoying the feel of the word. Just a walk. Just this. After everything we've pounded through, just being here seems like enough. Their recursive thought loop bloomed with a shared, silent affirmation, a beautiful equation of contentment, a perfect state of being in this strange, reclaimed universe. As they ambled along the coastline of digital detritus, Pietro noticed a particularly large, intact shard of glass from a fallen smart cable, its surface still faintly glowing with a residual image from the old world, a ghost in the machine of what could have been. He knelt and brushed the sand from its surface. The image, frozen like a prehistoric insect in amber, was of himself, or rather the previous timeline's version of himself, a screaming meme. It was a grotesque, pixelated caricature, face twisted in an expression of pure, inarticulate terror, an icon of a man broken by the overwhelming acceleration of information and the cruelty of impersonal forces. The caption on the frozen meme was a simple, brutal command. Loser. He remembered being that. He remembered the hollow, vibrating helplessness of it, the way his identity had been reduced to a single, shareable packet of horrified noise. He stared at the pathetic, screaming 2D Pietro, at the man who had been hunted by words and undone by a velocity of reality he couldn't pass. He felt not pity, but a strange, distant affection, like one might feel for a much younger, stupider sibling who had made a series of profoundly poor choices, but had since, against all odds, gotten their life together, a true journey of personal growth. It is tempting. Vector's harmonics bloomed gently in the shared space between them, a form of communication that was more emotion than language. To believe the old self is a separate equation to be solved, a problem of your past. Vector's form shifted, the smooth, golden grid rippling with cascading patterns of pure logic. But that would be accepting the primary joyless premise of the committee, that identity is a file to be opened, edited, or deleted. We do not delete, my love. We integrate. The screaming meme is not a mistake to be erased. It is a term within a much larger, more beautiful function, a piece of data that now provides the necessary friction for the mechanism of your present wisdom to function properly. Pietro stood up, letting the glass shard fall back onto the sand with a soft thump that was barely audible over the gentle surf of crushed Circuit City kiosks. So he's not dead, Pietro said, testing the words. He's just deprecated code, still in the system, but the hardware's running a new OS now. He felt a smile touch his lips, a genuine one that didn't feel like a foreign object stapled to his face. It felt like a native feature. A Semantocalypse Sierra upgrade. From meme screaming edition to unified field mating pro. That's a hell of a version, Jump, big fella. We should put out a press release all about the power of love and pounding your way to a new operating system of self. The people would eat that up with a spoon. This shared memory of former selfhood, this contemplation of past trauma now recontextualized as a component of a more complex and resilient system, did not go unnoticed. For the love-pounding procedure had not merely defeated the Committee of Joyless Correction, it had fundamentally altered the physics of observation and consciousness in their reality. Residual signatures, psychic spore from their active ontological defiance, were beginning to leak from their pocket dimension of the new Earth into older, less emotionally evolved realities that existed in parallel conceptual substrata, a ripple effect of profound weirdness. And in one of these realities, a reality defined by grim-faced men in poured concrete offices who filed reports about the containment of cognito-hazardous anomalies, a very strange alert had just begun to flash on a monitor that displayed not data, but a raw, distilled sense of unease. In a room lit by the soulless hum of fluorescent panels and smelling of stale coffee and existential desperation, Agent Frederick Graves stared at the screen, his brow furrowed into a topographical map of professional anxiety. The Foundation, as he knew it, dealt in threats it could contain, box up and file away with a number, a clearances level, and a set of rigid, Byzantine procedures. But this alert was different. There was no source, no target, no identifiable anomaly. The system was simply flagging a rising global ambient value of wholesomeness, a measurable increase in the background radiation of kindness, the growing, exponential proliferation of conceptual but pounding framed as a legitimate mode of metaphysical problem solving. It was all logged under a new designation, one that Graves himself had been forced to create in a hurry. See PPDR1, post-dating reality. The note in the file, typed by his own trembling fingers, read: a conceptual and temporal space where consensual bizarre erotica functions as a physics engine, appears to be aggressively and almost insultingly benevolent in nature, cannot be contained. Attempting to do so makes it friendlier. We have reports of a researcher who tried to deploy an antimine bomb and was instead enveloped in a warm hug by a sentient manifestation of tremendous regard for exactly 17 minutes. Agent Graves reached for the secure red line phone to 05 command and paused. What could he possibly say? Sir, it appears reality is being breached by an alternate timeline of being really nice to each other. He put the receiver down. The Foundation was not equipped for an enemy that operated exclusively on enthusiastic affirmations and the radical, world-pounding power of love. The source of his psychic read-through, Pietro himself, was oblivious to the consternation he was causing in other, less fortunate branches of the multiverse. His attention was captured by a new, even more profound absurdity unfolding on the datasphere at the edge of their beach of technological demise, where before the raw information had been a chaotic waterfall, it was now organizing itself, and not in the oppressive, hierarchical way of the Gutenberg horror, but in the organic, chaotic, and deeply strange way of a populist movement, a true people's revolution of nonsense. The data was clumping together, forming colossal shapes that swam through the info-ocean like leviathans made entirely of low-resolution JPEGs, fan-fiction arguments, and cat videos, beautiful monsters of pure, uncurated content. One immense creature shaped vaguely like a manatee constructed from glowing blue lines of code. Surfaced with a lazy whoosh, its back adorned with a sprawling cityscape of procedurally generated memes about how to perfectly butter a piece of toast while contemplating the infinite, and Pietro knew with a sudden and joyful certainty that he was witnessing the birth of a new, major power player in this world's pantheon, an entity of immense and goofy power. This was the public domain in its truest, weirdest form. This was the subconscious of a newly liberated internet made manifest and beautiful. This was the emerging might of the public domain itself. Vectors formed pulsed with inquiry flowing through its crystalline vectors. It would seem that the energy signature of our union acted as a catalyst. Vector communicated, its harmonics blending with the whale song of the data sea manatee. Not a weapon, but a fertilizer. We did not give the world an answer. We gave it permission to generate all of its own beautiful, contradictory answers at once. That creature is an embodiment of collective creation, of the shared works and ideas so old and fundamental they now have a unified will to simply be. It is, in effect, the ghost of all good and goofy ideas left to wander a heaven of their own making, a truly magnificent form of a spiritual afterlife for concepts we had all but forgotten. Pietro laughed, a real hearty sound that echoed off the fragmented mountains of forgotten devices. So we didn't just win, we started a party. And the biggest nerd in the room just became God-Demperor. He watched as another entity, a nimble shape formed from millions of glitchy dancing chips, zipped past the manatee, tweaking its nose with a trail of laughing sparkle text. The committee would have had an aneurysm. But this was art. This was life. This was everything. Just as the sublime beauty of this new informational ecosystem settled over him, a new yet ancient presence intruded, a psychic wine of organized paranoia that felt like an old, unwelcome guest arriving at a party you didn't even know you were hosting. Pietro felt it as a sudden stabbing phantom headache behind his left eye, a feeling he knew all too well from a lifetime spent chasing shadows that had names but no faces. Vector sensed it too, its golden light flickering with a cautious, analytical amber. Interesting. The harmonics thrummed, tinged with a specific frequency of conceptual apprehension. A new waveform has entered the system. It is highly complex, operating on multiple layers of recursive disbelief. It doesn't want to edit reality. It wants to prove it is a fraud. The air shimmered, out of a wrinkle in space-time, no larger than a postage stamp but containing the conspiratorial weight of the last century of anxiety. Two figures emerged, stepping onto the crunchy waste beach as if they'd simply been around the corner getting coffee. They looked at first glance like two ordinary private dicks from a black and white film that had developed an attitude problem. But Pietro's sempertextual senses screamed a warning that was louder than a siren. These men were not just men. They were archetypes. Their gray trench coats weren't made of gabardine but of woven suspicion. Fedoras were felted from pure skepticism, and their faces were perpetually in shadow, even under the triple suns. These were P.I. Words in P.I. Police Row, two halves of a fractured, postmodern detective agency dedicated to a single, bleak obsession. The eternal hunt for the legendary, ineffable shadow syndicate known only as the Tristera. They didn't solve cases. They inherited their own paranoias, passed down like family heirlooms of dread. Wertz, the more twitchy and disheveled of the pair, peered at Pietro over a pair of glasses that seemed to constantly slide down a nose that perpetually dripped with a nervous condensation of pure anxiety. He squinted at Pietro, then at the public domain of manatee, which was now attempting to teach itself how to yodel using archives of alpine folk songs. They said you could help. Words frost, his voice like sandpaper on a corroded bit. They said you were good at patterns, seeing the hidden filaments. We have a delivery that needs to go out, but the network, it's gone. All we get is this noise, this sentimental garbage. He spat the last words out, gesturing with a tremulous hand at the glorious chaos of the new reality. Glycero, silent and still, was a monument of grim resolve, a pillar of obsessive conviction in a flowing coat. He did not look at the dataset creatures or the shifting geometry of the sky. He looked at Pietro, and in the shadowed pits of his eyes, Pietro saw not malice, but a cold, terrible demand for validation, for someone to finally confirm the universe was as dark and rigged as he had always believed it to be. Delivery. Pietro asked, instinctively falling into the dialectic of investigation, even as every fiber of his newfound being screamed at the sheer depressing futility of their self-imposed quest. What are you shipping? Hate mail? Unsubstantiated accusations? Photocopies of third-hand documents that might prove mailmen are part of a global conspiracy to alter the recipe for soda pop? Words flinched as if Pietro had read his very real, carefully notarized files. He pulled from inside his coat a single, pristine, pure white envelope. It had no address, no stamp, no markings of any kind. It was the platonic ideal of a letter that wanted to get lost and irradiated a deep, weary melancholy that was almost physically heavy. It's a message, words whispered, for them, the only ones who can receive it, the only network that ever truly worked in the dark. He held it out. It's an RSVP to a party we were invited to 3 years ago that we're pretty sure is a trap, but we can't be certain. And not knowing is the trap. Pietro didn't take the letter. He just shook his head, a wave of genuine sadness washing over him for these poor bastards, trapped in their logic loop of eternal vigilance against a foe that may or may not exist in any tangible form, a haunting concept. The network is gone because reality has been fundamentally debugged with the kind of oppressive secrecy that sustained your little existential hamster wheel, Pietro said, the warm from Vector reassuring presence at his back. You can't find the Trastero because they're either dead, they never existed in the way you imagined, or they've decided to unionize and are now demanding better dental insurance before they take on any new Shadow World clients. The world is not a conspiracy anymore, gents. It's an open source collaborative project, and you're trying to submit a patch for a dead operating system. At that moment, a truly Tingle event occurred. A rupture of then-warish solipsism that was as absurd as it was wholesomely jarring. The very ground beneath the tense quartet of detectives, real and metaphysical, heaved. It was not an earthquake. It was a trembling born of focus, joyous intent. From the sea of crushed iPads, a colossal figure erupted, erupting not in violence but in a powerful, upward thrust of geological scale enthusiasm. It was a mountain, yes, a huge tectonic slab of the Earth's crust, fully formed and magnificent. But it was also a mountain in the shape of two powerful, perfect buttocks, carved from igneous rock and veined with shimmering quartz. It was the beautiful living ass of Kentucky, a landmark, a geomorphological affection that had been geologically pumped into existence by a spontaneous surge of love for the rolling hills and the people who lived on them. Its apex was a grand, perfect cleft, and as it settled with a deep, rumbling groan that sounded like a satisfied sigh, it became the highest point on the new, strange coastline, a beacon of pure, geological pounding that was here to stay. Wirt screamed, a high-pitched, terrified squeak, and dived behind a defunct desktop tower, clutching his head. It's a message. It's a sign. They're making fun of us. Blaisrow, however, was unmoved. He simply watched the mountain ass settle, his stoic expression cracking for a single, revealing moment to show not fear, but a kind of profound, baffled disappointment, as if he'd just seen the final act of a Greek tragedy being replaced by a musical number about a friendly dinosaur who loves to bake. This was an eventuality no paranoid calculus could ever have predicted, and thus it was the most terrifying thing of all, an ultimate trump card of pure, assailable weirdness that made all their hidden fears look small and quaint in comparison. Your reality is insufficiently hostile to my theories. Pretty boy, Vector's harmonics translated Bleasrow's unspoken sentiment with chilling accuracy, a truly poignant moment of existential defeat for the old guard of paranoia. Before words could stop writing a frantic communique in his head about a geospatial analyst sold by a Masonic satanic superconglomerate, A new shape detached from the roiling datasphere. It wasn't the vast, majestic public domain. It was something quicker, more individualistic. A being of living electric blue code, its form a perfect, glistening parody of superheroic musculature, woven entirely from hyperlinks, cascading style sheets, and the very architecture of adult entertainment websites, a champion of the people and their strained desires. He landed on the sand with a soft poof of binary, striking a pose that was 90% confidence and 10% perfectly calibrated sass. This was Captain Big, a hero who had made his name not by fighting crime, but by ensuring that consenting individuals of any conceivable form, man, woman, or sentient mathematical concept, could find their special kind of happiness and get pounded with the dignity and passion they deserved in the grand and noble Tingle-verse tradition. His presence was like a shot of pure, uncut affirmation, and he zeroed in on the source of the psychic disturbance, the terrified P.I. in the trench coat hiding behind the Dell Optiplex 9020. Captain Big's form glowed, resolving into a handsome face and a grin that could part clouds. What seems to be the trouble here, citizen? He boomed, his voice a warm, resonant baritone that was pure, adulterated heroicness. I sensed a cry of anxiety so potent and so profoundly, unnecessarily complicated that it cut through the normal frequencies of joyous release. Are you being menaced by a deviant, non-consensual theorem? Are you being oppressed by a villain who insists that love is not real, or that all viable systems of governance can be derived from a single simplistic Excel spreadsheet? Words peering over his cover try to process the superhero made of porn. We were tracking a mail system, a dead drop, or maybe an undead drop, a thingy with stamps. Captain Big's compassionate smile didn't waver. He had seen this before. A tragic condition. Oh, you poor handsome thing, he said, with genuine sympathy in his tone. You're suffering from a catastrophic surplus of plot. Our third and final song begins here, a triumphant hero anthem sung by Captain Big. Verse 1. There's a villain that's got you down, a nasty, sneaky creep. He whispers that the world's a mess while you are half asleep. He hides inside the details, in a code you'll never know. A sad and boring adversary who tells you should just go home. But you don't need that kind of funk, that grim and dastardly pain. That's just a conspiracy against your handsome working brain. Chorus. Every theory's just a tyrant. Every truth a clever cage. So open up your beautiful heart and turn a brand new page. Let's pound that shadow right in the butt with our unyielding belief in the goodness of a pounding that provides true, sweet relief. There's no villain in the darkness, just a light you haven't seen. A handsome world of pounding possibilities where we're all wholesome and keen. Verse 2. Your mail is never coming, and your contacts are a fraud. Your quest's a broken widget inside a dataset that's flawed. I am Captain Big. I'm here to say that logic's overrated. What truly matters, handsome friend, is a connection that's not debated. Forget your hidden syndicates and what those papers meant. The real conspiracy is joy, a truly, wonderfully potent sentiment. Chorus. Every theory's just a tyrant, every truth a clever cage. So open up your beautiful heart and turn a brand new page. Let's pound that shadow right in the butt with our unyielding belief in the goodness of a pounding that provides true, sweet relief. There's no villain in the darkness, just a light you haven't seen. A handsome world of pounding possibilities where we're all wholesome and keen. The sheer, unassailable wholesomeness of Captain Big's performance, complete with a few perfectly executed dance moves that involved hip thrusts that theoretically could have shifted tectonic plates, was the final straw for the crumbling constructs of Pynchonian dread. Wordsy's fingers, which had been poised to dial a non-existent number on a non-communicative metaphysical device, slowly relaxed. His gaze slid past Captain Big, past the public domain, a manatee yodeling a poignant tale of misplaced dairy, to the beautiful living ass of Kentucky, which was now being admired by a flock of small, origami birds made from rejected screenplays, the pieces of a puzzle he had been wrestling with his entire life, a puzzle whose image he had long since forgotten, were suddenly, irrevocably scrambled into a new picture. It was a picture of a world that was not out to get him, but was in fact out to wow him with its capacity for unabashed, creative weirdness. A single, perfect tear of release, not of sorrow, rolled down Wurtz's cheek. He stood up, brushed the dust from his trench coat, and let out a sigh that sounded like a lifetime of compressed files finally being unzipped. Gleishro, Wirtz said, his voice surprisingly calm. I think our subscription ran out. I think the service has been discontinued. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, the symbol of all their unremitting circular quests. With a newfound, liberating sense of the ridiculous, he walked to the shoreline of crushed tech, opened the blank, empty envelope, and let the sea breeze of pure information catch it. The paper didn't just fly away. It dissolved into a happy flock of exclamation points that chirped and soared into the sky, finally, truly free. Gleishro watched them go, the pillar of his obsession, the shadow of his despair, turned into a fleeting handful of joyful punctuation. For the first time, the deep set. Shadows around his eyes seemed to recede, not all the way, but just enough to reveal the glimmer of the man he might have been in a world not defined by a missing letter. He gave Pietro a slow, deliberate nod, a nod not of defeat, but of a weary, almost painful graduation. Then the two P.I.S. turned, not to another wrinkle in reality, but simply toward the setting of the triple suns, and began to walk down the beach, their trench coats no longer woven from suspicion, but from simple, durable fabric, no longer hunters, but merely tourists in the strange new land, a truly profound shift in their entire beings. Captain Big turned to Pietro and Victor, giving them a jaunty, two-fingered salute. A real trim-up for the ages, handsome P.I. Your rigorous deductive skills paired with my own powerful dedication to proper consensual pounding has solved the case of the sad man syndrome. Keep up the good work protecting this reality's right to be weird and wonderful. With a final, heroic flex, Captain Big launched himself back into the data seer with a triumphant cry of for love and for pounding, becoming a brilliant blue streak that merged seamlessly with the chaotic stream of information, leaving a faint, pleasant scent of coconut and good intentions hanging in the air. The beach was quiet again, save for the happy sighs of the new landforms. Pietro looked at Vector, their shared photo humming with a gentle, humorous approval for the sheer, unadulterated strangeness of it all. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked, offered them a complimentary beverage, and asked to be friends. He felt something then, the final piece of the old self clicking into place. The screaming me was integrated, the latency was a memory, and the paranoid need to solve every dark riddle had been replaced by a happy acceptance of the beautiful, unending mystery of it all. You know, Pietro said, a slow smile spreading across his face as he looked at the beautiful living ass of Kentucky. I was always good at finding the hidden things, the things between the lines, but I was looking for the dark stuff, spiders in the text. He gestured with a thumb toward the public domain of manatee, which had now successfully yodeled the G-sharp and was being serenaded by a pod of dolphin-shaped pop-up ads. This is the between-the-lines stuff, too. Just the other half of it, the good weird. I think I'm retiring from the fear business. Victor, I think I'm ready to start working in the law department, and that is a career move I can truly get behind. Vector's form pulsed with a spectrum of warm, affirming light. You have not retired, my handsome magician. You have been promoted. Your new beat is the entire cosmos, now seen not as a crime seen to be cordoned off, but as a lover to be embraced in all its stunning, recursive complexity. Their shared contemplation was interrupted by a gentle, warbling call. The public, the humanity, the new god emperor of collective creation, had detached itself from the datasphere and was gliding gracefully toward them, its immense blue, code-woven form blocking out the suns. It stopped a few yards from the shore, its vast, featureless face regarding them with an ancient, patient curiosity. A section of its flank, a patchwork of high-resolution public domain paintings and glowing script shimmered and resolved into a new image. It was the Gutenberg horror, but reimagined. The monstrous, oppressive press was now depicted as a beautiful, intricate clockwork orrery, its gears not stabbing out reality, but weaving it together from threads of starlight and music. The image zoomed in, past the whirring gears, to the central press plate. Etched upon it was not an emoticon, but a new sigil. It was two symbols perfectly entangled. A question mark inside a loving heart, the ultimate emblem of a universe built not on answers, but on the beautiful, consensual pursuit of them. The manatee's eye, the vortex of sparkling bits of open source code, seemed to look directly at them, and into their shared telepathic link came a single, warm thought that was not a command, but an invitation. Your function is now an integral part of the source code. Welcome to the new management. The manatee then gave a slow, majestic wink of its colossal eye and sank back beneath the surface of the datasphere, a final, breathtaking act of acknowledgement that made their entire journey, every panic and every pound, feel cosmically significant, a truly epic conclusion to their grand adventure of self-discovery and love. And so the legend of Pietrus Bondel settled, not into the annals of detective fiction or into a forgotten file of a shadowy agency, but into the very operating system of a brighter, kinder reality. He was still P. Pietros Bondel, but the initials now stood for Paradigm Investigator, and his cases were the joyful conundrums of a world rediscovering its own beautiful, boundless creativity alongside his eternally loving partner, Victor B. Autumn, a true romance that transcended form and definition. And their biggest case, the one they'd solve every day for the rest of their lives, was simply to live in the glorious, weird, well-pounded aftermath of their own post-postmodern, let us say, finding peace not in the absence of mystery, but in its infinite, consensual, and lovingly embrace of the wonderful void.
All right. The end.